sunlight slicing through the glass like a promise, hearing the words she had waited a lifetime to hear. Mrs. Hartman retains full ownership of her estate. Freedom, it had sounded simple back then. Now, as she turned the rusted key in the gate of her family home, freedom felt heavy, like carrying an invisible weight that refused to be set down. The iron latch groaned, the hinges shrieked a protest, and the smell of old stone and dust rose around her. The house stood tall and silent, its windows blind with grime, its eaves heavy with years of neglect. For a moment she almost turned back. Then she whispered to herself, "It's mine. It was always mine," and stepped inside. The first room greeted her with echoes. Every sound she made, the scrape of her boots, the slow breath she drew, seemed to bounce back with a faint delay, as if the house was listening before answering. She placed her suitcase down on the floorboards and traced her fingers across the cracked wallpaper. Once, Peter had run down this hallway, chasing a paper airplane. She could almost see him there, the small boy he'd been before greed changed his voice, before the years turned his eyes into mirrors of his father's. Renate swallowed hard. No ghosts, she told herself softly. Not yet. She moved through each room methodically, opening curtains, letting light in, sweeping away dust with the edge of her sleeve. When she reached the living room, she froze. The piano stood exactly where she'd left it, draped in a yellowing sheet. She pulled the cover away, and a dull chord rang as one of the keys sprang back into place. The note lingered too long, thin and haunting. She pressed another key, silence. A third, the same long echo, as if the air inside the house refused to let go. She closed the lid. Enough! Outside, the wind rose, pushing against the shutters. Somewhere in the chimney, something fluttered, maybe a trapped bird, maybe just the past. That evening, she lit the old stove. The warmth crept slowly into her bones. She made tea weak and bitter and sat by the window, watching the last light fade from the hills. When the clock struck 8, the telephone rang. The sound startled her. No one had called this number in years. Mrs. Hartman. The voice was young, female, nervous. "Yes, this is Clara from the agency. We received your message about the caretaker position. I just wanted to confirm that you'll need someone to stay on the property." Renate hesitated. "Yes, the house needs watching." "All right, I can send someone tomorrow." "No," Renate said quickly. "Next week, I need time to settle first." "Of course, ma'am. Congratulations again on winning your case." Renate hung up without replying. She stared at the receiver, feeling a strange chill. She hadn't told the agency about the court case. How did the girl know? She shook her head, brushing the thought away. Small towns talked, that was all. Night came quietly, bringing the first real darkness she'd seen in months. The city apartment where she'd lived during the trial had been filled with noise, cars, lights, strangers. Here, the silence felt alive. She took a candle upstairs to her old bedroom. The walls were still the pale blue her husband had chosen decades ago. On the dresser, beneath a layer of dust, lay the silver-framed photograph of her wedding day. The glass was cracked, splitting her younger face in two. Renate picked it up, thumb tracing the fracture line. "You were never real, were you?" she murmured to the reflection. Then she placed it face down. When she blew out the candle, the darkness folded around her like a blanket. For a moment she listened, the slow tick of the hallway clock, the wind outside, and then another sound. A soft thud from the floor below. She held her breath. It came again, faint but deliberate, like a footstep dragging slightly. Renate reached for her phone, no signal. She waited, every muscle rigid. The sound stopped. Minutes passed, only the wind now. Finally, she told herself, old wood, houses move in the cold. But she kept the lamp burning until dawn. Morning brought fog. It rolled down from the hills and settled against the windows, turning the garden into a gray sea. Renate brewed coffee and opened the front door. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. On the doorstep lay a small envelope sealed with wax. There was no postmark. Her name was written in careful ink, R. Hartman. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No words, only a charcoal sketch. The drawing showed the house. Every window, every tree, but in the sketch's upper window, the one above the piano room, stood a figure. A woman. Renate stared at it until her hands began to tremble. She folded the paper, slid it into her pocket, and whispered, "Someone's playing games." But part of her knew it wasn't a game. Later that day, she visited the town's small market. People turned to look as she passed, not cruelly, just curious. The trial had been public. Everyone knew her name now. "Mrs. Hartman," the baker said warmly, "you're back." "Yes, for good. Good, the house has missed you." Renate frowned. "The house?" The man laughed awkwardly. "It's just an expression, you know. No one's lived there since, well, since you left." She nodded and left quickly, his words lingering in her mind like dust motes in sunlight. Back home, she set her groceries down and noticed something strange. The piano lid was open again. She was certain she'd closed it. A single key was pressed halfway down, as if an invisible finger still rested there. Renate closed the lid slowly and whispered, "I told you, enough." That night she dreamed of water, a lake black and endless. Someone stood on the far shore, calling her name softly, like an apology. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears. She walked downstairs and found the front door slightly ajar. Outside, fresh footprints led across the dew-wet grass toward the woods. Renate followed them only a few steps before stopping. The tracks ended abruptly, as though whoever made them had vanished mid-stride. She turned back toward the house. From an upstairs window, she thought she saw a pale movement, a curtain shifting when no breeze stirred. Her heart began to race, not with fear exactly, but with recognition, as if something she'd long forgotten was trying to return. "Not again," she whispered. "Please, not again." The wind carried her words away, and somewhere, deep inside the house, a single piano note rang out, clear, trembling, and impossibly alive. Renate froze. Then, for the first time since coming home, she smiled, small, sad, but certain. "Then let's begin," she said quietly. The morning fog lingered stubbornly over the village, wrapping every rooftop and cobblestone in a silvery haze. Renate stood at the top of the stairs, her hands gripping the banister, listening. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, yet the previous night's piano note haunted her memory. Breakfast was a simple affair, coffee and toast, yet each sip felt heavy with thought. She couldn't shake the image from the sketch, the figure at the window. Who had sent it? And why now, after all these months of peace? A knock at the door startled her. She froze, staring at the wood. No one had visited yet. "Mrs. Hartman," a young voice called from outside. "Delivery." Renate opened the door to find a small package on the doorstep. There was no return address. She brought it inside carefully, the paper crinkling under her fingers. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, lay a small, antique music box. Its brass surface was etched with delicate floral patterns. She lifted it and turned the key on the bottom. A slow, haunting melody played, the same key that had sounded last night, clear and trembling. She froze. "This isn't random," she whispered. The sound seemed to echo from the very walls of the house. She carried the music box to the piano room. For hours, she moved it across the floor, listened, turned it over, and set it down. It felt alive, as if it carried the memory of someone else's presence, someone who had once walked these halls. A week passed. Renate tried to settle into routine, tending her garden, reading old letters, practicing the piano. But subtle changes began to unsettle her. Objects she knew she had left in one place were shifted. The faint smell of lavender appeared in rooms she hadn't touched. Footsteps echoed in hallways when no one was there. She confided in Elinor one afternoon. They sat in the sunlit kitchen, cups of tea warming their hands. "Elinor," Renate said, her voice trembling slightly, I think the house is trying to tell me something. Or someone." Elinor's eyes softened. "Or maybe it's your intuition. You've been through so much, Renate. Maybe the house simply remembers what you do." Renate shook her head. "No, it's more than that. The music box, the sketch, the feeling I get when I walk through these rooms. It's like guilt or warning." Elinor nodded slowly, sensing the weight behind the words. "Then we find out what it is, together." That evening, Renate explored the attic. Dust motes danced in the beams of her flashlight. Boxes of old belongings were stacked haphazardly. Photographs, books, letters, remnants of decades past. She opened one box and found her mother's journals. For hours, she read, tracing the life of a woman who had lived within these walls long before greed had touched them. Then she found a folded letter, yellowed with age. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and the words chilled her. "Renate, remember our choices echo in ways we cannot always see. The house listens. The house remembers. Do not ignore the whispers." A shiver ran down her spine. She closed the attic hatch, pressing her hand against the wall. Could it be possible? Had the house remembered? Or was her mind, scarred by recent betrayals, turning reality into something sinister? The next morning, she decided to investigate the history of the house. She walked to the town hall, where the archives were kept. Dusty ledgers and faded blueprints filled the shelves. She discovered the house had belonged to the same family for over a century. There were records of unusual occurrences, disputes over inheritance, reports of strange noises, even a fire in the East Wing decades ago. One entry caught her eye. March 12, 1923, Mrs. Capel reports hearing piano music in the middle of the night. House is otherwise empty. Renate felt her pulse quicken. A century ago, the house had whispered already. And now, after all these years, she had returned to listen. Evenings grew colder. The house seemed to grow restless as the sun set. The music box's melody returned nightly, sometimes in her bedroom, sometimes in the piano room. One night, she awoke to the sound of soft footsteps outside her door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady but her heart hammering. Silence, only the faint creak of the floorboards answered. She got up, lantern in hand, and walked down the hall. In the living room, a shadow flitted across the far wall. She froze, her lantern casting a trembling circle of light. "Show yourself," she demanded. The shadow didn't answer. It moved toward the stairs slowly, deliberately, and then vanished. Renate felt her pulse spike. This is real. Someone is here. She returned to the piano room and sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant. The melody of the music box played once more, soft but insistent. She touched the keys, pressing down lightly, and realized that the notes of the piano matched the tune from the box perfectly. A sudden memory struck her, a lullaby her mother had played when she was a child. A melody meant to comfort, but now, twisted by years and silence, it felt like a summons. Renate closed her eyes, listening, letting the notes fill the room. And then she heard it, a whisper, almost too soft to hear. "Renate, remember." Her eyes snapped open. She looked around, alone. Yet the whisper lingered, echoing from the walls, from the air itself. The following days, Renate began keeping a journal. She noted everything, every misplaced item, every cold draft, every melody, every whisper. She cataloged her feelings: fear, wonder, nostalgia, suspicion. One afternoon, Elinor arrived with a young man named Jakob, a local historian who specialized in old estates. "Renate," Jakob said, bowing slightly, "you asked about the history of your house. I've traced it through property records, newspaper archives, and family diaries. There's much to tell." They sat in the sunroom. Jakob spread photographs and letters across the table. The house has a long history of mysterious events. Fires, disappearances, claims of voices. Not all can be explained by superstition. Some are simple coincidences. But patterns do exist. Renate listened, her heart tightening. Patterns of warning, Jakob replied carefully. Of guilt. Of unresolved conflicts that leave traces in the house, emotional residues, if you will. People who enter can feel them. Some interpret it as haunting, others as intuition. Renate swallowed, and the music, the shadows. Jakob's gaze softened. Perhaps echoes of the past or reminders. The house may be trying to guide you or test you. Either way, it wants attention. Renate nodded, trying to steady her breathing. "Then I will pay attention." That night, she sat by the piano with the music box on top. She began to play the lullaby, letting each note stretch across the room. As the melody continued, she thought she heard a faint tapping at the window. She approached slowly. The glass was fogged, and outside the garden seemed empty. Yet the tapping persisted, 3 soft, deliberate knocks. Renate's hand trembled as she opened the window. Nothing, only the moonlight on wet grass. She stepped back, heart racing, and realized the music box had stopped. The room was silent. And then, softly, from somewhere deep within the house, "Renate, remember." She shivered, gripping the piano bench. She had no answers, no explanation, only certainty. Something in this house, its past, its secrets, its memory, was reaching out, and she could no longer ignore it. Her fingers hovered above the keys again. She had a choice. She could retreat, deny the presence, and return to her life of order and independence. Or she could follow the whisper, trace the echoes of guilt, memory, and mystery that the house carried. Renate exhaled slowly, setting her jaw. "I will follow," she said softly. "I will remember." Outside, the wind sighed, carrying with it the faint, haunting melody of the music box, as if approving her decision. And somewhere in the shadows, a figure watched, waiting. The next morning, Renate awoke to a pale winter light filtering through the curtains. The house felt unusually still, as if holding its breath. She lingered in bed, listening to the faint creaks of the wooden floor and the distant clatter of shutters in the wind. The music box lay on the bedside table, silent, but she felt its presence like a pulse in the room. By mid-morning, she found herself drawn to the attic again. The ladder groaned under her weight, the air thick with dust and the scent of old wood. She moved slowly, running her fingers along the trunks and boxes that lined the walls. Something compelled her, an invisible tug, as if the house itself guided her hands. She paused at a small, unassuming chest tucked in the corner. It wasn't particularly large or ornate, but for some reason her instincts screamed that it was important. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the lid. Inside were letters bound by faded ribbon, journals with cracked spines, and photographs of people she didn't recognize. One photograph caught her eye. A young woman, pale and solemn, standing in front of the same house, though the windows seemed darker, almost watching. Her eyes were intense, almost accusatory, and something about them made Renate's stomach churn. She traced the edges of the photo, noticing a faint inscription on the back, "To remember, lest we repeat." Renate shivered. The words echoed in her mind, recalling the whisper she had heard. Remember. The house wasn't just alive with memory, it demanded it. Downstairs, Alina was in the kitchen, preparing tea. Renate joined her, the photograph clutched tightly in her hand. "Alina, look at this," she said, laying the image on the table. Alina leaned over, squinting. "Who is she?" "I don't know," Renate admitted. "But I feel like she's connected to the house, to its past, maybe even to me." Alina touched her shoulder gently. "Renate, you're seeing patterns where there might not be any. But if it helps, let's explore it together. There's nothing wrong with seeking answers." Renate nodded, though unease lingered. She could feel the house pressing against her, insisting she uncover its secrets. Later that day, Jakob arrived, carrying a bundle of documents. "I did some digging," he said, spreading old property deeds, letters, and news clippings across the table. "This house has been the center of more than just strange noises. There's a history of tragedy, unexplained disappearances, sudden deaths, and families who abandoned it abruptly." Renate's hand hovered over a document describing a fire decades earlier in the East Wing. Could this be connected to the music box?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Jakob nodded. "Possibly. Fires, tragedies, and strong emotions leave echoes. They imprint. That's why some report feeling, hearing, even seeing things long after the events." Renate's gaze fell on a letter dated 1932. The handwriting was elegant, almost like a plea. "We cannot undo what has been done. The house remembers, and we must not forget. Guard its truth, for it will call again." Her pulse quickened. The more she uncovered, the more she realized the house's history wasn't just old stories, it was alive, feeding on memory, guilt, and secrets. That night, Renate lay awake, listening. The wind whispered around the eaves, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible melody. The music box sat on the dresser, closed, yet somehow the tune threaded through the room. She rose and tiptoed to the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling. Slowly, she began to play the same lullaby from the music box. Each note stretched into the shadows, curling around the corners of the room, moving up the stairs and into the empty hallways. Then she heard it, faint scratching, like fingernails against wood coming from the East Wing. She froze, heart hammering. No one was there, and yet someone or something was trying to communicate. Renate stepped forward, lantern in hand. The floorboards groaned beneath her, shadows shifting with every flicker of light. At the end of the hall, the East Wing door stood slightly ajar, a shadow pooling in the gap. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady but tight. Silence, Only the faint echo of the piano reached her ears. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, save for an old wardrobe, its doors slightly unlatched. On the floor lay a small scrap of paper, scribbled with hurried handwriting. "Do not ignore what you hear. Remember, or it will repeat." Renate picked it up, her pulse racing. The handwriting seemed vaguely familiar, almost like someone she had seen in her mother's journals. Her mind raced. Could the house itself be sending messages, or was she spiraling into obsession? Over the next few days, she explored every corner of the East Wing. Hidden compartments, long-forgotten drawers, and thick layers of dust revealed letters, sketches, and old diaries. Each item added to the puzzle, revealing the tangled lives of those who had lived here before. One night, as snow fell silently against the windows, Renate played the music box again. This time, the melody seemed almost alive, vibrating through the room. She heard whispers, faint but clear. "Renate, find the truth. Do not falter." Her hands shook as she set down the box. She realized the house wasn't just a place to live. It was a living archive of emotion, memory, and secrets, reaching out to her as if she were the only one who could confront its past. Elinor and Jakob returned the following evening. "Renate, you look exhausted," Elinor said, concern in her voice. "I am," Renate admitted, "but I feel closer to understanding something the house wants me to know." Jakob leaned forward. "Be careful. Some histories are heavy. The past isn't always kind, and not all echoes are harmless. But if you're willing to face it, you might uncover truths that have been buried for decades." Renate nodded. She had made a choice. She would not run from the house's secrets. She would not ignore the whispers or the music. That night, she sat by the fireplace with the music box on her lap. The snow fell silently, blanketing the world in quiet. She opened the box and let the melody fill the room. For the first time, she spoke aloud, almost a whisper. "I will remember, I will understand, and I will uncover the truth." The wind rose outside, rattling the shutters. The house seemed to inhale, waiting, listening. And somewhere in the shadows, a presence watched, patient and silent. Renate closed her eyes, letting the notes flow, and felt a connection to the past, to the house, to the unseen watcher. The journey had begun. And as the melody lingered, soft and insistent, she sensed a promise. The house's secrets were not yet ready to reveal themselves entirely. The shadows moved closer, and a whisper threaded through the air, barely audible but unmistakable. "Renate, remember." The morning after the music box episode, Renate awoke with a lingering unease. As if the house itself had whispered secrets she was only partially ready to hear. The pale winter light cast long shadows across her room, and the faint scent of old wood and fire lingered in the air. She dressed quickly, determined not to waste the day, but something pulled her toward the East Wing again, the part of the house that had begun to feel alive in ways she could neither understand nor control. Jakob was already waiting in the kitchen, a notebook and stack of old letters in front of him. "I've cataloged everything we found yesterday," he said, his tone cautious. "Some of these documents date back over a century. You won't believe the stories some of the previous owners lived through." Renate sat, her fingers brushing the edge of the table as though grounding herself. "Show me," she said. Jakob handed her a bundle of letters, yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible. "The first thing to note," he began, "is that this house has been in the same family for generations, but not continuously. There were periods when it was abandoned, sometimes for years, often after tragedies, deaths, disappearances, strange occurrences no one could explain. And in every case, the house changed those who lived in it. Renate absorbed the information, feeling the weight of history pressing against her. Changed them? How? Mentally, emotionally, even physically, Jakob replied. Look at these letters. People who lived here reported feeling watched, hearing music that wasn't there, sometimes experiencing nightmares or intense guilt over events they didn't understand. Some even left without warning, never to return. Renate's hand trembled slightly as she opened one particular letter. The handwriting was meticulous, almost frantic in its clarity. The house remembers everything. Every misdeed, every secret. It does not forgive, it does not forget. We thought we could leave, but the house does not let go. It waits, watching, reminding. She shivered. The words resonated with her own experiences. The whispers, the music box, the subtle pull toward the east wing. Later that afternoon, she decided to explore the small library tucked behind the main staircase. The room smelled of old paper, polished wood, and something slightly metallic that she couldn't identify. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through the tall windows. As she examined the shelves, a book fell unexpectedly from a high ledge. She caught it reflexively, a leather-bound journal with a cracked spine. The first page bore a name, Adeline Richter, 1924. Renate's breath caught. Another Richter, another echo of the past. She opened the journal, reading the elegant, flowing script. The house is alive. It sees what we do, knows what we hide. I fear that my sins will be reflected back upon me, but I cannot leave. I am bound here, just as my mother was, just as her mother before her. We all thought we could escape, but the house never forgets. Renate closed the journal slowly, her heart pounding. The parallels were uncanny. The same feeling of being watched, the same whispers, the same compulsion to uncover hidden truths. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, and she almost dropped the book. Outside, the snow had begun to fall more heavily, blanketing the world in white. The house seemed to exhale, and in that exhale, she thought she heard a faint, almost pleading voice. Do not leave, do not forget. Her hand gripped the journal tighter. She wasn't imagining it. The house was alive, and it had chosen her as its witness. That evening, Alina joined her by the fireplace. You've been quiet all day, she observed. Renate placed the journal carefully on the table. The house, it's more than just a building. I think it's aware of us, of me, of everything that's happened here. Alina's eyes widened, but she didn't dismiss Renate's fears. I've heard of such things, she said. Old houses, especially ones with long, tumultuous histories, can carry strong residual energies. Emotions, guilt, fear, they imprint themselves. Maybe the house is reflecting all of that back to you. Renate nodded slowly. It's not just reflection, it feels intentional, like it's guiding me. Jakob entered then, carrying another set of documents. I found something you might want to see, he said, laying a series of letters on the table. These are from the 1940s. There was a death here, a woman named Elise Richter. She vanished under mysterious circumstances. Her husband and children claimed she left of her own accord, but neighbors reported hearing screams at night, strange lights in the windows, and shadows moving without explanation. Renate leaned closer, heart racing. Shadows, lights, the music box, could it all be connected? Jakob shrugged. Possibly, but the strangest part is the last entry in her diary. Listen to this. I try to hide my guilt, but the house knows. It whispers my failings, it watches my every step. I cannot escape it, and neither can they. Renate swallowed hard. The word guilt echoed in her mind. She had felt it too, an inexplicable, almost inherited sense of responsibility, as though the house demanded not just observation, but acknowledgement of wrongs long past. Days passed, and Renate became increasingly absorbed in the history of the East Wing. She uncovered old family portraits, letters, and newspaper clippings. The more she learned, the more the line between past and present blurred. She began having vivid dreams, the music box playing on its own, shadowy figures moving through corridors, whispers that carried both warning and plea. One night, she dreamt she was walking through the hallways of the house, but the rooms were unfamiliar, older, almost pre-war in their appearance. A woman stood at the top of the staircase, her eyes wide with terror. "Renate," the woman called, her voice urgent but distant. "Remember, do not forget." Renate tried to respond, but her voice was swallowed by the shadows. She reached out, and the woman vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and something metallic. She awoke with a start, heart racing, the music box open on her bedside table. Its melody was faint, almost as if it had been playing in her dream. Determined to understand, Renate decided to confront the East Wing directly. She set up lanterns, notebooks, and cameras to record her observations. That evening, she sat alone in the main hall, listening. The house was quiet at first, almost serene. But as the night deepened, she heard the softest creak, a footstep, almost imperceptible, coming from the East Wing. Renate's pulse quickened. She rose slowly, holding the lantern high. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The door to the East Wing loomed before her, half open, shadows pooling inside. She stepped forward, and the air grew colder, carrying a faint metallic tang. The music box began to play on its own, soft and haunting, filling the room with its insistent melody. And then she saw it, a figure, fleeting and indistinct, moving in the corner of her eye. Every instinct screamed that it was not human, yet it was deliberate, purposeful. The figure paused, and she caught a glimpse of its face, pale, anguished, familiar, as though looking at a mirror of guilt and regret. Renate's hands shook, but she steadied herself. "Who are you?" she called, voice echoing. The figure tilted its head, and a whisper reached her ears, carried on the wind and the notes of the music box. "Remember, or it will repeat." The figure vanished, leaving only the faintest imprint of cold on the floorboards. Renate exhaled slowly, realizing the house was testing her, pushing her to uncover truths, to face the guilt, both old and new, that had accumulated over generations. By morning, she was exhausted but resolute. She shared everything with Alina and Jakob, who listened intently. "It's more than history now," Alina said gravely. "The house is communicating. It wants you to understand something deeper. Perhaps a truth about the family, about its past, or about yourself." Jakob added, "Whatever it is, Renate, you need to approach it carefully. The house doesn't forgive easily. It demands attention, acknowledgement, and perhaps penance." Renate nodded. "I understand. I won't run. I will uncover everything, the guilt, the secrets, the shadows. I have to." That night, she returned to the East Wing alone. The house was silent, yet she felt it watching, waiting. The music box sat in the corner, still closed, but she sensed its presence like a heartbeat. She knelt and opened it, letting the notes fill the air. A shadow shifted, just beyond the lantern's light, and a whisper drifted through the room. "Renate, do you remember now?" She felt a chill, but also a strange clarity. The house's mysteries were no longer distant echoes. They were here, alive, demanding acknowledgement. And for the first time, she felt ready to listen fully. The dawn was thin and gray, filtering through frost-coated windows and leaving the house in a dim, uncertain light. Renate had barely slept. The previous night's encounter in the East Wing, the shadow, the whispered question, lingered in her mind like a pulse she could not quiet. The house was no longer merely a building. It was a presence, observing, testing, and beckoning her deeper into its labyrinth of secrets. Jakob found her in the library, hunched over the journals and letters she had collected. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" he asked, concern tight in his voice. Renate shook her head. "I couldn't. Something or someone is guiding me. I think I almost understand, but the pieces are just beyond my reach." Elinor, entering silently, placed a hand on Renate's shoulder. "You're pushing too hard. The house will reveal things in its own time. But," she hesitated, "you cannot ignore it either. There's a history here that wants acknowledgement. Guilt, secrets, and perhaps unfinished business." Renate looked between them, determination hardening in her chest. "Then we go deeper. We uncover everything, past and present. Whatever the house wants, we will face it." By mid-morning, they were in the East Wing once more. Renate carried her lantern and journal, Jakob followed with his collection of letters and notes, and Elinor brought a small recorder, in case anything unexplainable occurred. The corridors were narrow and shadowed, and every creak of the wooden floors echoed in the stillness. "Look at these walls," Jakob said, tracing the faded wallpaper patterns with his hand. "There are layers beneath layers. Old paint, old wallpaper, even older etchings, marks people left behind. Some of them are just dates, others, words. Words of fear, regret, even pleas." Renate crouched to examine a corner, where faded carvings were barely legible. "Forgive me, I could not leave, it knows all." Her fingers traced the letters, and an icy shiver ran up her spine. "It's like the house is a diary itself," she murmured, "recording every emotion, every mistake." Elinor nodded. "Residual energy, yes, but there's something more. The repetition of words, phrases that suggests awareness. It's almost conscious." Renate's heart pounded as she moved further down the corridor. At the end, a narrow staircase led to a room she had yet to explore. The door was old, warped by time, but slightly ajar. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder, almost damp, and the scent of something metallic and iron-heavy lingered. The room was small, sparsely furnished, a bed, a dresser, and an old mirror standing in the corner. The mirror's surface was mottled with age, but as Renate approached, she felt a presence behind her. She spun around, lantern held high, but saw nothing. Only the faint outline of a shadow in the corner, shifting like smoke. Her breath caught. The music box from her bedside table began to play softly, though she had left it behind. Renate turned back to the mirror. And then she saw it, her reflection, yes, but distorted. Her eyes looked hollow, as though carrying a weight that was not solely her own. A second figure appeared behind her reflection, blurred, indistinct, but undeniably there. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Remember, the sins you carry are not yours alone." Renate froze, her heart hammering. She realized it was true. The house was revealing more than just history. It was revealing patterns, cycles, guilt passed down, choices repeated. She felt a sudden rush of vertigo, a dizzying connection to every previous inhabitant, their fears, their regrets. Jakob's voice called from the doorway. "Renate, are you all right?" She turned, the shadow in the mirror dissipating. I think I saw them, all of them. The house, it's showing me what it has witnessed, and it's not done." Elinor stepped closer, voice soft. "Renate, sometimes these visions are warnings, sometimes lessons. The house doesn't act out of malice, but it does demand attention. It wants acknowledgement and perhaps a reconciliation of guilt." Renate swallowed, nodding slowly. She pulled out her journal, determined to record everything. Words poured from her pen as though compelled, observations, reflections, questions, fragments of conversation she had overheard in her dreams. The recorder on the table, left running, picked up something she had not spoken aloud. A faint voice, almost imperceptible, repeated her own words. "Do not forget, do not forget." As he shivered, days turned into nights with little rest. Renate immersed herself in the Richter family history, discovering connections and patterns that had gone unnoticed. She learned of hidden relationships, unspoken crimes, forbidden loves, and tragedies that the world outside had forgotten. And as she did, the house responded, subtle shifts in temperature, faint footsteps in empty halls, whispers that sometimes begged, sometimes warned. One evening, as she pored over an old family tree, she noticed a recurring name, Elise Richter, the woman who had disappeared decades ago. Every time Elise appeared in letters or diaries, tragedy followed. Her husband's breakdown, her children sent away, neighbors fearful. Renate's stomach churned. Elise's fate was unknown, yet her presence was alive in every shadow, in every whisper. She felt compelled to visit the cellar. Something had drawn her there repeatedly in dreams, a sensation she could not ignore. Jakob and Elinor tried to dissuade her. "The cellar hasn't been used in decades," Jakob said. "You might disturb something better left alone." But Renate shook her head. "No, I have to go. The house, it's asking me to confront something down there." The cellar door creaked as she opened it. Cold air poured out, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood rot. She descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing. The lantern flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. At the bottom, the room was empty, or so it seemed. And yet, Renate felt the presence immediately. The air was thick with unspoken words. She moved toward the far corner, where a faint glow emanated from behind a stack of crates. Pushing them aside, she found an old trunk, its lock rusted but intact. She forced it open. Inside were bundles of letters, photographs, and a small, leather-bound diary, Elise's diary. Renate's hands trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with confessions, reflections, and pleas. "I tried to escape the shadows, but they follow. Every choice, every lie the house remembers. I fear I will never be free. And now, the one who comes after will know the truth I could not speak." Renate's breath caught. The diary seemed to address her directly, as if the house had chosen a messenger across time. And then a sudden gust of wind slammed the cellar door shut. The lantern flickered violently. She felt eyes on her, unseen but piercing. A whisper, close and urgent. "Do not fail, or it will consume you too." Her knees buckled slightly, but she steadied herself. She had never felt so alive, so terrified, and so connected to history all at once. The house was no longer just a home. It was a living chronicle, demanding acknowledgement, demanding that the past and present meet. Renate knew, with unshakable certainty, that the path ahead would be perilous. Shadows, guilt, and secrets were waiting, not just to be uncovered, but to be confronted. And in that confrontation lay the possibility of release or destruction. She closed the diary carefully, tucking it under her arm. She would face whatever came next. The house had chosen her, and she would not turn away. As she ascended the cellar stairs, the music box began to play faintly, almost mockingly, and the whisper followed her up the staircase. "Remember, remembers." Renate shivered, but a quiet determination settled within her. She would remember. She would uncover every truth. And she would confront whatever haunted the Richter house, past, present, and perhaps the very soul of the home itself. The morning fog clung to the estate like a shroud, softening the edges of the old trees and the towering stone walls. Renate stepped outside, the diary of Elise clutched tightly against her chest, her breath visible in the cold air. Every instinct told her that the answers lay in confronting the house itself, not just its history. The shadows were patient, but relentless. Jakob joined her at the gate, his face pale from lack of sleep. "Renate, I don't know if this is wise. The house, it's changing. The air is thicker, the whispers louder. I feel like we're not just observing anymore, we're part of it." Renate nodded. "I know, but if we don't understand, if we don't face it, Elise and maybe others will remain trapped. We can't ignore it. I can't ignore it." Elinor appeared from behind, her eyes scanning the fog-drenched path. "We need a plan. The diary is the key, yes, but it only tells us what Elise feared, not what actually happened. There are gaps, and those gaps are dangerous." Renate turned a page in the diary. Elise had meticulously recorded daily observations, the rhythms of the house, the strange noises at night, even subtle shifts in the floorboards as if the house itself were breathing. But there was one entry that made Renate's pulse quicken. "I know they are watching. They are not human, or perhaps they are, but twisted by the house. If you read this, beware, the house demands more than truth. It demands surrender, but surrender will not save you. Only acknowledgement can." By noon, they returned to the east wing. The corridors felt narrower than ever, the light thinner, more diffused, as if the house itself resented their intrusion. Renate's fingers brushed over the wallpaper, the carvings, the faint etchings of past lives, and each touch seemed to echo back voices. Faint, overlapping, urgent. Jakob moved beside her, whispering, "Do you hear that?" Renate nodded. The whispers, they're not random, they're forming words, patterns, messages. Elinor held up the recorder. "Let's capture it. Sometimes when we hear, we miss what is clearly said. The house may guide us, but we must listen carefully." They walked in silence, each step measured. When they reached the old mirror in the corner room, the surface was darkened, but something flickered beneath the glass. Renate approached. Her reflection appeared normal at first, then subtly warped, the eyes darker, the edges of her face stretched just slightly. And then, almost imperceptibly, a second reflection appeared behind hers, Elise. Renate's fingers trembled as she reached out to touch the glass. "Elise," she whispered. The mirror did not respond. Yet a whisper filled the room, close and clear. "You must not just see, you must understand." That night, sleep was impossible. Renate lay in her bed, the diary open on her lap. She read and reread Elise's entries, trying to decipher codes within the text, patterns that could explain the unexplainable. Every once in a while, she would hear a creak outside her door, the faintest hint of footsteps packing, then retreating. Finally, she rose, lantern in hand, determined to follow the sound. The hallway was darker than ever, and the familiar walls seemed to twist in the flickering light. She stopped at a closed door at the end of the hall, one she had never dared open before. A sense of dread coiled in her stomach, but curiosity and purpose propelled her forward. The door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a room she had never seen. Dust hung thick in the air, and in the center was a table with scattered papers, old photographs, and a small chest. The chest, unlike the one in the cellar, was locked with intricate carvings of faces, faces twisted in fear, sorrow, and despair. Renate ran her hands over the carvings. The house is showing me the people who suffered here and their guilt, but it's more than history, it's alive. She noticed a photograph tucked beneath the chest. Elise, young and vibrant, standing in the same room, her expression unreadable. In the corner of the photo, a faint shadow seemed to move, even in the still image. Days passed in a blurred rhythm of study and exploration. Renate, Jakob, and Alina pored over documents, cross-referencing diaries, letters, and photographs. They uncovered a web of secrets, forbidden relationships, betrayals, mysterious disappearances, and a family lineage haunted by repetitive cycles of guilt and punishment. Renate felt the weight of the house more acutely. It was no longer merely showing them, it was interacting. Doors would close on their own, whispers would repeat her own thoughts in slightly altered form, and shadows seemed to follow them through the halls. One evening, as they sat in the library, a sudden crash echoed from the east wing. Renate, heart racing, followed the sound with Jakob and Alina. The room was empty, but the mirror glimmered unnaturally. Renate approached cautiously. "It's Elise," she whispered. "She's trying to communicate." A faint light shimmered within the mirror, forming words, almost imperceptible. "The truth is not what you see. The past is a cage. Break it." Renate felt a cold hand, imaginary or not, grip her shoulder. She turned, but no one was there. The whisper followed, almost like wind brushing her ear. "Do not fail, do not ignore, do not forget." The next morning, they investigated the West Wing, where the oldest rooms were untouched for decades. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs draped from chandeliers, and the air smelled of decay and time. Renate found another chest, similar to the one in the East Wing, but this one was carved with symbols she did not recognize: spirals, eyes, hands reaching upward. As she examined it, a sudden realization hit her. The carvings mirrored the positions of people in the old photographs, each face corresponding to a symbol. This was a map, not just a record. The house was guiding them, showing them connections, relationships, and mistakes that had bound spirits and people alike. Renate's hand hovered over the lock. This is it. This is what the house wants me to confront." Jakob took a deep breath. "And if we open it?" Renate looked at him, determination hardening. "Then we will know the truth, and we will face it together." She turned the key slowly. The chest creaked open. Inside were letters, trinkets, and a small, folded note in Elise's handwriting. "To the one who comes after me, the house is not your enemy, but it is patient. It tests, it teaches, it remembers. Confront it with courage. Do not run, and know you are never alone." Renate felt tears sting her eyes. The house was alive with the past, but it was not malevolent. It demanded understanding, acknowledgement, and courage. She had begun to understand her own fears, guilt, and patterns, mirrored by Elise's own life decades ago. The night deepened, shadows lengthened, and the whispers grew softer, almost tender. A final message floated through the room, faint, almost a sigh. Remember and carry forward. The rest will follow. Renate closed the chest, her resolve unshakable. The house had shown them more than history, it had shown them themselves. And the final confrontation, with past and present entwined, was coming. She turned to Jakob and Alina. Tomorrow we go to the attic, the last room, the heart of the house. Whatever is waiting there, we face it, together. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, but inside, the three of them felt something profound. Not fear, but purpose. The house was not finished with them, but neither were they finished with it. And as Renate closed her eyes that night, she thought she saw a figure in the corner of her room, Elise, nodding faintly, a whisper of encouragement trailing behind her. "You are ready, now." The attic door groaned as Renate pushed it open, the wood swollen with age. Dust motes floated in the dim sunlight that filtered through a cracked window, and the air smelled of decay, old paper, and something faintly metallic. It was colder here, the walls seemingly closing in, and an uneasy quiet stretched across the space. Jakob held the lantern, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows. Alina followed, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the diary. "Renate, are you sure we're ready?" Renate took a deep breath, her heart steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "We have to be. Elise trusted us with this. The house has guided us here. Whatever is waiting, we face it together." The attic was filled with relics of a forgotten past. Old trunks, broken furniture, yellowed letters, and tattered curtains hanging like ghosts. At the center stood a large, ornate mirror, taller than any of them, framed in carved wood that depicted entwined faces, faces of sorrow, fear, and longing. It pulsed with a faint energy, as if breathing. Renate stepped closer. Her reflection shimmered, then blurred. And then she saw it, Elise standing behind her, her expression unreadable but intense. A whisper floated through the room. "You must confront yourself, and what you fear most." Renate felt her own memories stir, regrets, guilt, unspoken truths that had haunted her for years. The house wasn't just showing them history, it was reflecting their inner lives. Jakob's voice broke through her reverie. "Renate, look." He pointed to the floor. Etched into the wooden planks were patterns similar to those carved into the chests they had opened. Symbols connected in spirals, circles, and lines, almost like a map of the house's memory. And in the center, a small metallic key gleamed, though it had not been there before. Renate picked it up. The weight was heavier than it seemed, and an electric thrill ran through her fingers. This opens something deeper, the heart of the house. They moved as one toward a hidden hatch beneath the old rug. Renate inserted the key. The lock clicked, and the hatch slowly creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Alina whispered, This must be the true center, the house's secret." Renate nodded, and maybe the truth about Elise. They descended carefully, each step echoing in the confined space. The air grew colder, thicker, almost alive, pressing against them as if testing their resolve. When they reached the bottom, the stairway opened into a circular chamber, walls lined with mirrors. But these mirrors were different, distorted, warped, reflecting not only their faces but fragments of the past. Elise, the family who had lived here, shadows of fear and guilt intertwined. Renate's voice trembled slightly. It's like the house kept everything, every memory, every emotion, every choice. Jakob swallowed hard. and it's showing us our fears, regrets, and truths. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping voices, sometimes coherent, sometimes fractured. Remember, do not hide, face what was denied, accept what was lost. Renate stepped into the center of the chamber. A particular mirror caught her eye darker than the rest, with a faint, swirling mist behind the glass. She approached cautiously. As she touched it, the mist coalesced into a figure, Elise, more vivid than ever, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. Renate whispered, "Elise, I don't understand. Why all of this?" Elise's reflection moved independently, her lips forming words that seemed both in the mirror and in Renate's mind. The house is a mirror. Of history, yes, but also of guilt, fear, and unacknowledged truths. You cannot save me by avoiding yourself. You must accept, confront, and release. Renate felt tears welling. She saw herself as the house showed her, flawed, hesitant, full of unspoken regrets, and yet capable of courage and love. Jakob stepped forward. "We're ready. Whatever this house asks, we'll face it together." Elinor nodded, her hands steady now. "It's time. We finish this for Elise, for ourselves." Renate looked back at the swirling mist, took a deep breath, and spoke aloud. I accept my fear, I accept my guilt, I accept the past, and I will not let it control me." The mirrors trembled, the whispers rising into a crescendo. Shadows twisted and then suddenly collapsed, a wave of calm washing over the chamber. The swirling mist condensed into a faint light, illuminating a small, sealed box in the center of the floor, a box that had not been visible before. Renate opened it carefully. Inside were letters, photographs, and a locket. The letters revealed the full story. Elise had discovered the house's memory, its ability to trap emotions and guilt. She had tried to free herself, leaving clues for anyone who could follow, who could confront their own inner truths. Renate held the locket. It contained a miniature portrait of Elise, smiling faintly. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The house's whispers had softened into a gentle hum, almost like a sigh of relief. They returned to the attic, carrying the box. The oppressive weight that had clung to the house seemed lighter, the air clearer. The mirrors no longer distorted. They reflected the three of them plainly, together, standing strong and aware. Renate looked at Jakob and Elinor. "We've done it. The house, it's free in a way. Elise is free. And maybe so are we." Elinor smiled faintly. "Or perhaps it's just the beginning. Houses like this, they never truly sleep. But we've learned to face them, and that matters." Jakob put a hand on Renate's shoulder. "We survived the heart of it. We survived ourselves." As they stepped outside, the fog had lifted, and the estate looked different. Softer, gentler, but alive. Shadows moved across the walls, yes, but they seemed less threatening, more like reminders than warnings. Renate whispered, almost to herself, "Elise will carry your story forward." And then she noticed, in the faint sunlight glinting off the old stone fountain, a single, small flower growing in defiance of the cold, barren ground. A delicate symbol of hope and endurance, a subtle reminder that even in darkness, life continues. Night fell and the estate settled into a quiet rhythm. But in the far corner of the east wing, a mirror reflected a faint silhouette, watching, patient, subtle, not malevolent but aware. A whisper drifted on the wind, barely audible. "You are ready, yet the story is not over. Remember, some truths wait for those who follow." Renate felt a shiver, not of fear, but of anticipation. She knew the house had more to reveal, more lessons to teach, but that was a journey for another day. For now, they had faced the heart of it, and a fragile piece lingered. The diary was closed, the letters preserved, and Elise's memory honored. And as Renate looked at the estate one last time that night, she understood. Some mysteries are eternal, some guilt never fully fades, but courage and acknowledgement can carve paths through even the darkest past. A subtle wind brushed her hair. She smiled faintly. We'll be ready for whatever comes next. And in the deepest shadows, the house seemed to exhale, almost with approval, almost with a promise. The story is not over.